I'm excited today to continue this conversation we began last week. I want to share a little bit of a story with you. George Carmack lived in the 1800s, and George Carmack was one of many people throughout a couple of decades who heard about this thing called the gold rush. So traveled out west to California and the western states and tried to figure out, like, where can I find a unique pocket geographically to find some gold? And George Carmack, after a journey to California and trying to find gold, eventually struck out, did not find gold, in a last-ditch effort, started to travel north to Western Canada in the Yukon. So I'm a dual citizen, and so a little bit of context, the Yukon is like, if you go northwest and like just keep going to like no man's land, that's the Yukon, okay? Not a lot of people there, especially at that time. But George said, I'm going to go, and I'm going to try to find gold and just try to make this thing work. And had heard news that there was some gold in this area that was a little bit of an offshoot of the Yukon River, a very big river that's very long. And the story goes that George Carmack was either napping, which I like to believe, like that's good pastime right there, or he was fishing a little offshoot of the Yukon River called Rabbit Creek, and he was by this river, and he spots something jutting out of the creek, and it's literally these nuggets, these pieces of gold out of this river. Over time, as the river had come and had washed out the land, you started to see these gold pieces that were in the soil, in the surface there. George Carmack walked away with over $1 million in gold. And to this day, that region has produced $250 million of gold. And to this day, 200 gold mines are still active. So George had this experience. He entered into this land that he didn't know. Like, it was just the last effort, right? And I love the picture of him, like, what was his realization when he finally realized, like, what that was in the creek, right? Like, was he thinking he's daydreaming? Am I still asleep? What's all going on here? Maybe he's like, is that just a weird-looking fish? I don't really know. But he stumbles on this gold, and it produces this result. This thing blows up. People here starts to grow and influence and changes that region to this day. It's this great reminder to me that access doesn't equal experience. Access doesn't equal experience. George, in that moment before discovering what that gold was, he had access to gold, right? He was either fishing or napping right next to gold, you know? He's doing his thing. And somewhere along the way, there's this discovery, but then there's a stepping into experience. There's stepping into mining that, and over the next period of time to discovering what is all in this soil. But access doesn't equal experience. Maybe you think about a restaurant you've been by multiple times. And maybe this restaurant is like a little sketch, like it's a little bit of a dive, right? And you're like, I don't know if we should eat there. Like, I don't know if it's safe and sanitary and all those things. But maybe you get a recommendation or you see something online and you have burgers at this place or tacos or whatever it is. And you come to this experience of like, this is the best thing ever. Like, how was I sleeping on this for all these years? Or maybe it's a musician, a musical artist that you're like, how did I live without knowing this guy or this gal? Like, till you're introduced, you're like, how did I exist without this? We all have had things in our lives that we've had access to. We've driven by them. They're people we've known. They're people we've been around, but we haven't fully experienced. And today, I want to look at something with you that Jesus put very clearly in front of his followers multiple times. And it's something that we have access to. It's something that's been made available to us, but that many of us do not experience. I want to look at John chapter 10 with you, and we started in this passage last week. It's the teaching of Jesus. He says this: anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Okay, so Jesus is starting to use a word picture, right? He's using an agricultural picture, very common to the culture he would have been in, very common to that society. And Jesus is using some figures of speech, right? He's like, okay, guys, there's a shepherd, and there's a gate, and there's a pen here, and you enter in this way. There's people coming in, going out. There's a shepherd, there's a thief and a robber. He's using this picture with them. And what strikes me is that the Pharisees who he's talking to would have had this language. They when he started talking about sheep, they're like, oh yeah, we know sheep. We've seen them lots of times, right? They're walking on the road when we're all walking on the road. We're people in the audience, we're farmers, all this kind of things. And Jesus, what strikes me is Jesus talks in this way, but then look at verse 6. Look at what the writer John says, that Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Now, I'm not the smartest guy in all of West Michigan, but Jesus starts talking about that. There's five or so verses there, a couple of statements about sheep and shepherd. I can kind of understand what he's talking about, right? I'm probably not the gate. I'm probably not the shepherd. I'm hopefully not the thief or the robber, so I must be a sheep. Okay, I can kind of track with what Jesus is saying. But it says this, the Pharisees did not understand. And I wonder for the Pharisees if it was not an intellectual issue. I don't think they were too dumb to understand what Jesus was saying. I don't think Jesus magically just started speaking an unknown language to them. For the Pharisees, they didn't understand. It was not an understanding issue. It was an experience issue. Jesus was talking about something. He was talking about a reality that was so far divorced of what they understood about themselves and about life following the way of Jesus. They couldn't comprehend it. You know when Siri says to you, sorry, I didn't get that, right? That's the Pharisees in this moment. They did not understand what he's telling them. And again, there's this picture, right, of sheep and shepherds and gates. And just for a moment, let's just look at this little clip, beautiful clip of what can sometimes happen to sheep. And let's see if we can relate to it in any way. Let's just take a look at this together. Sometimes in life you get a little stuck, right? Sometimes you get a little trapped by life, and you keep moving on, and you take a step forward, and then, okay, it happens, right? And if you don't think you're like a sheep, I don't know, I look at that video and I see my life. How did I end up in that relationship again? How did I end up in that pattern again? How did I end up in that thought thing again, or that bad habit, right? We can be a little bit more sheepish than we might care to admit. Let's look at it one more time with a little more drama this time, okay? Just a little more something to, yeah. He's getting free. He's moving on. Okay, yep. Sometimes we're like sheep, right? That's funny, but I mean, I've had that experience, right? How am I in the same rut again? How am I in the same conversation again? The Pharisees, they couldn't wrap their minds around the idea that they would need some kind of leader, that they'd need some kind of shepherd. They couldn't get their mind around that they would need some kind of gate, some way to filter in, and some truth to follow, and some way to enter into a new way of living. And they couldn't wrap their brains around that they would actually need to belong to other people. Jesus was saying, I want you to follow me and enter through me, and I want you to do it alongside other people. And that's something that they just couldn't understand. And it's something, by and large, we don't either. It's something that so many of us have to figure out and have to learn, and not just have access to or have it be available to us, but to step into an experience in a growth, intentionality in. Now, how do I know that? How do I know that? If you look at statistics of loneliness or isolation, in the U.S., it would be higher than almost any other country in the world. Some would say 50% of people experience loneliness on a regular basis. 50% of people, 1 out of every 2 people just say, yeah, that's me. And more specifically, 1 in 5 people responded to this very specific question, this very pointed question. Not like sometimes do you feel lonely, not sometimes do you experience those emotions, but they said yes. 1 in 5 people said yes to this question. Did you experience loneliness a lot of the day yesterday? 1 in 5 people said yes. That the majority of my last 24 hours, I walked in loneliness. I felt all alone. I felt like I wasn't connected. I didn't have a place to belong. And this, like many other statistics, does not really change when you step inside the walls of the church. Many of us in spaces like this would have that same experience, 1 in 5, if not more. So yeah, if I'm honest, I feel alone. And maybe I'm married and I have a family, but I don't have a sense of belonging, of a people and belonging to. And it startles me because we are so connected, right? We can be so connected and so active and so social and so networked, but we can be alone. I want to ask you this question. Are you socially connected but spiritually isolated? Are you socially connected but spiritually isolated? Socially, do you have people that you go to networking things, you have friends, your calendar is very, very full. But when it comes to following Jesus, when it comes to hearing and following the voice and the leadership of Jesus in your life, are you isolated? Are you on your own, trying to figure it out, trying to learn it, trying to grow, trying to start with Jesus, trying to grow with Jesus, trying to flourish with Jesus? Are you on your own? As Jesus said, I've called you to something different. Look at verse 5. He describes what's happening when we try to follow him, when we try to live this life with him. Verse 5, but they, his sheep, will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus is saying, hey, just look, like I'm not the only voice at play here. I'm not the only influence at play here. I realize that, and I'm calling you to follow me. Verse 8, all who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep, my sheep, the people I'm building, the people I'm growing, they won't listen to them. They have not listened to them. I find that picture of the voices so helpful because I don't know if you're like me, but in experience of my life and even in faith, it can be like, is that the voice of God? Is that Joel's voice? Is that Christy's voice? Is that Culture's voice? Like whose voice is it? There can be so many voices. And when it comes to following Jesus and living in isolation and trying to do it, it's just a couple of voices. That can be the stranger's voice. That can be something that comes in to steal and kill, destroy. The first is the voice of fear. The voice of fear. The voice of fear. And the voice of fear sounds like, man, I can't really be in those relationships, or I could never really have those relationships that we're trying to hear and follow and grow with Jesus because, man, if I actually shared my story, people would be out. I'm not good enough. I'm not spiritual enough. I'm not mature enough to be in those kind of relationships. The voice of fear. Maybe there's woundedness. There's a past story that would just speak into that and create fear and hold us back. The voice of fear. The voice of fear. Number 2, the voice of pride. Maybe the voice of pride is either, I don't need those relationships, I can figure it out on my own, or I'm going to engage in those relationships, I'm going to be in those circles, but I'm going to do it on my terms. Not really the terms that Jesus invited me into, not really what the scriptures would describe, but I'm going to engage with other people, but it's going to be to serve me, it's going to be to build my image, it's going to be to reinforce what I think, how I want to live, and at the end of the day, I'm not fully responsible or accountable. They're going to be there, but I'm not going to fully engage them. The voice of fear, the voice of pride. Just a couple of these voices that can get in and cause us to live in isolation. I think about a period in my life where I got to spend about 6 months in Auckland, New Zealand. And it was super, just great time of my life. I was about 20 years old. at the time, and so had, all of life figured out at 20, as you do. But got to soak in a lot of good stuff. If you don't know, that is a hobbit hole in a place called Hobbiton from a movie and book series called Lord of the Rings. Okay, so that's where I am. Not all the doors in New Zealand are circles. But it was a great time in my life, and I remember towards the end of that season, again, about a little longer than a semester, began towards the end of my season. It was the end of my bachelor's degree, this ministry program I was in, and I started to have this thought, oh, snap. I got to figure out what's happening next in my life. Like, I got to decide, what am I doing after graduation? Maybe there's some high school seniors in the room, and, everyone's asking you that question. It's a little bit of that thing of like, man, I got to dial this in. I got to lock this in. I got to figure it out. And I remember I was between really two primary opportunities. The first was to stay in New Zealand and to stay at the church I was at, and a great church, amazing people, and grew so much there, and to stay there. And there's a lot of appeal to that. Obviously, the country is in, but the people and the role and all those things. And the second was to land back at Journey, which my family was able to start Journey about 18 years ago. And so it was really this cool kind of full circle moment. I remember having conversations with John on Skype. Anyone remember that? Skype? Yes, I think it still exists. God bless them. So we had these Skype conversations. And I remember some of them were, more formal. Some of them are just catching up and, hey, what's God doing in your life? How is he leading you? All this stuff. And I remember I was in this season of trying to weigh these two options. And if I'm honest, as I look back on that season, it wasn't that I didn't know what to do. And it wasn't that I didn't, I just didn't know the answer. Like, I wasn't just waiting on the answer, like God hadn't really given the answer. I found myself paralyzed and confused because I almost didn't know how to go and get the answer. It wasn't that hey, I'm taking these steps, I'm listening, I'm reflecting, and I haven't got the answer yet. It was I don't think I ever am going to get the answer. I don't think I'm going to be able to figure this out. I don't know if I can crack this code. What do I do? And I remember having these internal wrestles, these nights of staying up and well, what about this and what about this? And it just was this ping pong back and forth and back and forth. And I remember there was this voice of fear of hey, if you invite other people into that, they're going to be dude, get a grip, grow up, figure it out, right? Or he's not as spiritual, as deep, or as wise as we think he is. This voice of fear. What if I make the wrong decision? What if I hear God wrong? There's a voice of pride of man, I've tried to have this image, I'm 20, I should figure these things out, I should know this by now. And it literally immobilized me. I literally could not take a step forward. I had been bound by those two voices and convinced that was true. And it wasn't until I just took some baby steps. It wasn't anything overly magical, and John and I's Skype interviews turned into pastoral counseling sessions and free counseling and all that stuff. And it was I was just trying to figure out man, help me not just get an answer, help me figure out how to live an answer and live in a way that I can hear the shepherd. And it was this very formative experience and landed on the decision. And I think it was the right one. I think I did the right thing, right? And I just remember looking back to that, man, I had so far convinced myself that I had to make the decision in isolation. I'd welcome that voice of fear, welcome that voice of pride. I was living isolated. Let me ask you again, are you socially connected but spiritually isolated? Because there's this invitation of Jesus not to just hear him and follow him and respond to him and follow him in our lives, but to do it alongside other people who are trying to do the same. Again, Jesus gives us this picture. Verse 4, he says this, he, Jesus, goes on ahead of them, and his sheep, they follow him because they know his voice. Something about being invested and connected and networked with other people who are trying to hear the shepherd is by default, we naturally learn to hear him better. We naturally learn to hear him more and be more aware of his voice. Verse 9, they will come in and go out and find pasture. Just said, hey, you need a shepherd. You need a voice to follow. You need a gate. You need a way to enter into this life. And I'm the shepherd, I'm the gate, and you need other sheep. You need other sheep. You need others who are trying to hear and follow the shepherd. You need other sheep. You need others who are trying to hear, not who have it perfectly down, not who are all the way arrived yet, but people who are trying to hear and follow the shepherd. Think about it this way. If you're in a classroom setting, I just bring your mind into like school mode here, okay? If you're in a classroom setting, when it comes to following Jesus, when it comes to learning this journey of faith, we need a couple things. We need teachers, we need classmates, and we need students. We need teachers. We need people who are voices of instruction, voices of wisdom, voices of counsel and of knowledge, people who are one step or a couple steps down the road farther than we are. We need teachers. Someone like John did for me, to say like, hey, here's how I approach this decision. Here's how some ways you can discern this. We need teachers. We need classmates. We need people who are like, hey, I don't know either. I don't know what the teacher's up to. I just know the homework sucks, right? Like that's all. That's what classmates are from. I love this idea of C.S. Lewis. He said this, that friendship is born the moment you say, what? You too? I thought I was the only one. And so much of our lives of following Jesus with these classmates relationships is like, I know, brother, like I've got a 2-year-old too. It just doesn't make sense. Like the tantrums will come. I'm in it with you. I don't have answers for you, but I'm in it with you. Classmates. And then we need students. We need students. And we need this realization that any one of us, regardless of how far along we are or not with Jesus, that we can be a teacher for someone else. We can say, hey, here, like we sang earlier, I've witnessed this. I don't know how to explain it or to formula around it or to make it happen, but I know that God heals. I know that, and I've seen him heal in my life. You can be a teacher. We need teachers. We need classmates. We need students. We need other sheep. And one of the things I love that Jesus has designed, hardwired into these relationships, is they do a couple things in our life. They invest some qualities in our lives. And I want to give you just a couple. The first is strength. Strength. When we are walking and sharing our lives and sharing our victories and our struggles, when we are walking, trying to hear and follow the shepherd, there is strength that comes with that. I want to take you to the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. Maybe you heard this at a wedding before. It's not necessarily a wedding passage, but it applies. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 says this, 2 people are, say this with me, better. 2 people are better. You said it, not me. For they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Likewise, 2 people lying close together can keep each other warm. But how can one be warm alone? A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated. But 2 standing back to back can stand back to back and they can conquer. 3 are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. There is something about other people. There's something about the assurance and protection and strength that comes with sharing it with other people. Another one is healing. Healing. What strikes me about relationships is relationships can be the places of our greatest pain and woundedness, but they can also be the source of our greatest healing. And regardless of what's been mostly true in your life, the reality is none of us heal alone. None of us heal alone. Look at the Proverbs, words of wisdom here. The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Another translation says it's a healing balm. It's just like those words of life, those words of wisdom are just like a nice bandage put on a wound. It brings healing. That's emotional healing. That's soul level healing in our lives. But go one step deeper in James chapter 5, it says this: confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person, it's powerful and effective. That strikes me so much. We go to God for forgiveness, right? I'm not asking you, hey, like, sir, can you forgive my sin? But there's something about confessing both where we've messed up, where we want to get it better, and confessing truth, confessing reality, confessing grace and gospel to one another. There is healing. There's something healing about someone staring you down and saying, God's grace is sufficient for you. There's something healing about someone saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But God is with you. He's for you. He loves you. I'm so sorry that you are experiencing that addiction again, or you're experiencing that pain point again. But I want you to know, God says you're more than a conqueror through him. There's something that's just like, it's healing. It's healing. We go to God for forgiveness, but there's something about other people that there's this healing, emotional, spiritual healing. And the last is guidance. Guidance. And that's really a thing about me in New Zealand. That's what I needed. I needed like life guidance. I needed like, hey, like you're going back and forth. Like let's get down this path right here. But we also need that in our walks with Jesus and growing with him. Hebrews chapter 3 says this: be careful then, dear brothers and sisters, make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving. Like on your own, you can get out there and distracted. Unbelief and distraction and fear, turning you away from the living God. Here's how you do it. You must warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived. None of you will get distracted and get deceived and get off the path by sin and harden against God. There is guidance. There's guidance. There's direction. There's vision. There's the ability to see and move forward in truth. We need a shepherd. We need a gate. We need some other sheep. I want to let you hear a story by my friend Brian. And Brian, I got to hear just some of his story a handful of years ago. And over the last amount of time I've gotten to know him, has just lived this principle, honestly, in a way that's challenged me, in a way that's not natural to me. This is a harder teaching of Jesus for me to live into, to say, like, I want to rely and invest in other people. And Brian's modeled this so well. Take a look at this video, which talks about the power of living with other sheep in multiple seasons of life.
Hi, I'm Brian Ish, and I've been attending Journey Church for the past 5 years. I was born into the home of a pastor. I was the youngest of 4 children. My dad changed churches while I was in high school, and I went to college, came back from college. My dad was getting ready to retire, was basically cast out of the church. So all of a sudden, it was kind of empty. Met my wife, and my wife's family was very clannish, and I became isolated from friends. Then we divorced, and then I was starting from ground zero. Eventually, I had a friend that introduced me to a ministry called De Coloris. I saw people that were living in genuine Christian community, people that lived life fearlessly, transparently, and loved each other and weren't afraid to tell each other that they loved them. A couple years ago, I got a phone call. Her name was Ellen. I had not spoken to or seen Ellen for about 20 years. She was in a health crisis, and she said, I just need somebody to pray for me. And I said, well, of course. She joined my small group, and it all blossomed into a romance. We did everything together. About a year later, I had a big health crisis, and I was in the hospital for 16 days. Ellen was at the hospital for me every day, along with about 40 other people. I came to a Saturday morning little conference thing, and they were talking about circles of ministry, and that just kind of lit my fuse. And I said, yeah, I've got all these circles of ministry. I have people that I've worked with in the past, and I try to show Christ to them. Met a gentleman, a big hulking guy named Big Joe Jones. He had just gotten out of prison and was trying to experience community. He and I played golf together that day and got to know each other. For the past 2 years, Big Joe has been living and sharing in my house with me. And we added another, one of his brothers from prison named RJ. And RJ, for the past 6 months, he is sharing my house with me. I am being a mentor to a 15-year-old juvenile that's in detention at Bethany Christian Services. I spend about 4 hours a week with him. I've been selling cars for 30 years. Another circle of ministry. I lost my career. And I was just at my end. God provided me a part-time job at Saskatoon Golf Course, which opened up so many more circles of ministry. God opened up another opportunity for me to have another circle of ministry, doing security at Van Andel Arena and DeVos Hall. February 9th of last year, I lost my best friend that night, and it was really hard, but I have all these friends that carried me through my grief, and I was privileged to plan her memorial service, and we had it here at Journey, and all of my circles showed up. My atheist friends showed up. My friends from work showed up. My friends from my small group showed up. My De Colores family showed up. My friends almost filled this church. It was an incredible experience for me.
One thing I love is just the term Brian used, the circles of ministry. And we all have circles we're in. This is a circle you are in. You're in a team or group environment at work or in your church community, in this community. What are the circles you're in? And I want to encourage you, maybe one of those is an opportunity to hear and follow the shepherd alongside other people. But often there's a step, there's a question, there's an initiation, a step we can take to engage that and to say, I want to hear and follow alongside of the people who are trying to hear and follow. I also love the Brian's in circles that are not yet Jesus followers. It's like, how do you show that? How do you create that environment to be a student-like environment where you get to invest and pour into people's lives? We were designed to hear and follow together. Hear and follow together. I want to give us a couple of steps to engage us today, just make it very practical for us. The first is this: to look for the gold. Look for the gold. If you're George Carmack by the river, where's the gold? Where is there gold in the river that God in all his grace and providence has already put in your life? He's already put a person or people or a couple, a family in your life. But there's some initiation. There's a little bit of stepping out of pride or fear and just say, I want to look for that gold. I want to find it. And second is this: to confront the barrier. What's the barrier for you? What's the barrier for you in being connected and growing in relationships with other people who are hearing and following the shepherd? Maybe for some of us, our calendar is too full. Maybe for some of us, it's an allotment of time. It's a time issue. Maybe for some of us, again, it's the voice of pride or of fear or another voice that would just say, you can't or you don't have to or you shouldn't engage those relationships. Maybe it's a place of woundedness, a place for Jesus to come in and heal through other people. What's the barrier? Would you confront it? Would you be honest about it? Would you stare it down? And then 3, would you make a move? Make a move. Think about those circles. Think about the places you're in. Would you make a move?